And I Can Read book, Stuart Little, Stuart at the Funhouse. Story by Susan Hill. Pictures by Lydia Halverson. HarperCollins Publishers. Stuart Little, Stuart at the Funhouse. One day, Stuart Little and his brother George went to an amusement park. Look at all the rides, George said. Look at all the food, Stuart said. This is great, said George. I always wanted a brother to go to the amusement park with. I'm your man, Stuart said. What do you want to do first? Stuart asked George. I want to do what you want to do, says Stuart. Look, there's the strongman game, said George. Well, I don't think, Stuart started to say, but George had already run ahead. Stuart followed. George picked up the hammer and swung it hard. We have a winner, the man said. Your turn, Stuart, George said. Stuart looked at the hammer. Do you have any other sizes? Stuart asked the man. One size fits all, the man said. I guess you need a strong brother to play this game, George, Stuart said. That's okay, Stuart. Let's try the pony ride, said George. George and Stuart got on their ponies. All the ponies began to walk faster and faster. Stuart's pony didn't move. Giddy up, shouted Stuart. The pony lady laughed. You're not heavy enough to ride. The pony doesn't know you're on his back, she said. Stuart waited for George to finish. I guess you need a big brother for this ride, George, said Stuart. That's okay, Stuart, George said. Let's try the roller coaster. Stuart and George stood in line for the ride. The cars on the track looped up and down and around and around. People got on and off. Hooray! We're finally at the front of the line, George said. Next, shouted the man. That's us, said Stuart. Sorry, kid, the man said to Stuart. He pointed at the sign. You must be this high to ride the roller coaster. I guess you need a tall brother for this ride, says Stuart. You go on without me. Stuart waited on the ground and watched George. Now what, Stuart? Asked George when the ride was over. How about the fun house? Okay, Stuart said. The fun house sounds fun. George and Stuart paid for their tickets and went inside the fun house. A sign said, Entering the Hall of Mirrors. They stepped inside. Entering the Hall of Mirrors. The mirrors made them look wobbly. The mirrors made them look wiggly. Suddenly they stopped and stared. Look, George! I'm big now, Stuart said. And I'm small, George said. Big Stuart looked at little George. Little George looked at Big Stuart. I'm sorry I kept picking rides and games for regular-sized people, the tiny George said. That's okay, the tall Stuart said. They stepped away from the mirrors. Sometimes I forget you're not stronger or bigger or taller. You're my little brother, and you're the best brother I ever had, George said. Thanks, George, Stuart said. Now you pick a ride, Stuart, said George. Stuart smiled. 12.